A cocky billionaire walks into a diner, intending to mock a simple waitress. He asks for financial advice as a joke, but her first, unexpected words don't just shut him down. They shatter the very foundation of his life. Get ready for the story of Drake Harrison and the waitress whose wisdom was worth more than his entire empire. You won't believe what she says that leaves him speechless. Where are you listening from? And if you enjoyed this story, please like the video and let me know in the comments section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going. Drake Harrison stepped into the small, unassuming diner with a kind of arrogance only a billionaire could possess. His tailored suit and polished shoes were out of place among the worn booths and checkered floors. But to him, this was just another stop on his endless quest for a bit of solitude, albeit in a place he'd never set foot before. He was used to fine dining, exclusive restaurants where the food was crafted by world-renowned chefs, where the atmosphere exuded luxury and sophistication. But today, he needed something different, something real, or at least that was the excuse he told himself. Just a quick bite, and then I can get back to my empire, he muttered, scanning the menu with the kind of indifference only a man accustomed to getting what he wanted could muster. A waitress, no more than 25, approached. Her name tag read Angella. She was slender, with short dark hair tucked neatly under a simple cap. Her uniform was worn but clean, and her eyes, calm, almost too calm for someone in her position, met his gaze without a hint of hesitation. "What can I get you today?" she asked, her voice soft but clear, unbothered by his sharp, demanding stare. Drake barely glanced at her, flipping through the menu. He wasn't interested in what the diner had to offer. He was more interested in testing the waters, seeing if he could get some amusement out of the situation. "A coffee, black, and whatever your best dish is," he said, tossing the menu aside. Angela nodded and turned to walk away. But then, in a moment of thoughtlessness, Drake spoke up again. "Hey, while you're at it," he said, a smirk crossing his face, "you wouldn't happen to have any advice for a guy like me, would you? You know, someone who's got it all. Money, power, influence. How does someone like you manage money?" It was meant to be a joke, a jab at her, a way to belittle the very idea of a waitress offering financial advice. He'd heard enough of the world's wise counsel, mostly from expensive consultants in high-rise boardrooms. But this was something different. He had no intention of taking her seriously. She was just a waitress after all. As she paused in her steps and turned to face him, a flicker of something, was it recognition, passed through her eyes. Drake leaned back in his seat, expecting her to stammer or laugh awkwardly. Instead, she answered, her voice steady. "You think your wealth gives you power, but the true key to success is understanding that money doesn't make you rich. Your mindset does." Drake froze. The words, so simple and direct, hit him like a cold splash of water. For a moment, the smirk faltered. Did she really just say that? He wasn't used to being challenged like this, not from someone in a position like hers. He recovered quickly, though, dismissing her response as a fluke. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked with a chuckle, leaning forward slightly, still trying to hide his confusion behind a mask of humor. But Angela didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She simply stood there, unshaken by his condescension. Her eyes remained locked on his, unwavering. "I'm saying that wealth doesn't come from what you have. It comes from what you do with what you've got. People who only focus on money miss out on the most important thing, the ability to create value to help others grow. Money is a tool, not a trophy." Her words stung. Drake's initial amusement quickly turned to discomfort, though he tried to hide it. Who does she think she is? He thought. Some little waitress with a philosophy on life. She doesn't know the first thing about business. He shook off the lingering unease and leaned back in his chair, deciding to press on with his self-amusement. "So, what? You think I don't understand that? I'm a businessman, not some fool." Angela nodded slowly. "You've built an empire, but what is it really built on? Money, or something more?" Drake's grip on his coffee cup tightened. No one had ever dared question his empire like this. This woman, he thought, has no idea who she's talking to. But something about the calmness in her voice kept him from snapping. Instead, he found himself curious. What would she say next? Was this some kind of trick? He had to find out. The seconds passed in silence. Drake's mind raced. He was trying to keep the conversation light, but her words had already started to chip away at the walls he'd built around himself. He couldn't remember the last time someone had dared to speak to him like this, without fear, without hesitation. As Angela turned to walk away, Drake cleared his throat, a final attempt to regain control. "Hold on," he said, his voice sharper now. "I'm curious. What else would you say? What should someone like me, someone at the top, do differently?" Angela turned back to face him. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a quiet understanding, as though she'd heard it all before. "What you have is impressive," she began, "but there's more to life than what you can buy. Money is a tool, but it won't fill the emptiness you might feel inside. You've probably been running so hard to build something that you've forgotten why you started in the first place." Drake's breath caught in his throat. How could she know that? He wasn't just building an empire, he was building a legacy. He was trying to leave something behind, a mark that could never be erased. But lately, there had been an unease in his chest, something he couldn't shake. The success didn't feel as fulfilling as it once did. He tried to shake it off. "And how would you know that? What makes you so sure about all this?" He gestured to the diner, his voice laced with sarcasm. "You work here. Do you think I don't know the difference between people like me and people like you?" Angela didn't flinch. Instead, she looked at him for a moment, then answered, "It's not about where you work. It's about what you value. If you keep chasing power and money, you'll end up alone. But if you learn to build something that benefits others, you'll have something worth keeping." Her words struck deeper than he cared to admit. But before he could say anything, she turned and walked away, leaving him in a swirl of confusion and uncertainty. Drake watched her go, his mind reeling. He sat there for a few moments, still gripping his coffee cup, trying to process what had just happened. How dare she but wait? How does she know? The dissonance in his thoughts was disorienting. He was a man who had built everything he had through sheer will, ambition, and a ruthless desire to control. Now, for the first time, he was questioning that path. He shook his head. "She's just a waitress," he reminded himself. "She doesn't know anything about what it takes to succeed." But deep down, something inside him was starting to shift. Drake finished his coffee quickly and left the diner in a hurry, determined to shake off the encounter. The words Angela had spoken kept echoing in his mind. "What you have is impressive, but there's more to life than what you can buy." What did that even mean? As he stepped into the parking lot, he climbed into his sleek black sports car, the engine purring as he started the engine. His company was waiting for him. His empire demanded his attention. But as he drove, the doubt lingered like a shadow in the back of his mind. He had everything anyone could ever want: money, influence, control. But why did he feel like something was missing? The thought irritated him and he quickly dismissed it. "You've built something. You've won," he told himself, trying to silence the unsettling feeling. "This is the life you chose." Yet, as he navigated the busy streets, he couldn't help but feel as if Angela had planted a seed of doubt that was now starting to grow. What if there was more to success than just financial wealth? What if the way he had been living his life was wrong? The questions gnawed at him as he entered his towering corporate office, the glass windows reflecting his pristine surroundings. The cold, sterile environment was familiar, comfortable even, but now, somehow, it felt alien. It wasn't the same place it had been yesterday. The people who worked for him seemed to be mere cogs in a machine that he had been controlling for years, but the power felt hollow. Drake sat at his desk, staring at the spreadsheets on his screen, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't concentrate. He kept thinking back to the diner and to Angela. How had she managed to get under his skin like this? The next day, Drake couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. He spent hours reading through articles and books on emotional intelligence, relationships, and personal growth, things he had never paid attention to before. He even started looking into mentorship and how to build stronger connections with people. It all seemed foreign to him, but there was something about it that called to him. That afternoon, he found himself back at the diner, though this time he wasn't there just for a meal. He was there to find the answers that had been eluding him. He wanted to confront Angela, ask her more about what she meant. Was she right? Was he really missing something? When he walked in, the familiar smell of coffee and eggs hit his nostrils, but today it didn't have the same comforting effect. He scanned the room quickly, his eyes landing on her. Angela was standing behind the counter, arranging a plate of food, but when she saw him, she stopped. Their eyes met across the room. Drake wasn't sure what to expect. He wasn't even sure why he was there. But in that moment, something inside him urged him to speak. He approached the counter. "Hey," he began, his voice softer than usual. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday." Angela raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. She simply placed the plate on the counter and waited. The words Angela had spoken echoed in Drake's mind long after he left the diner. He couldn't remember the last time someone had made him feel this way, vulnerable, uncertain, and oddly free. For years, his life had been a tightrope walk between power and control, each step calculated, every move intentional. And yet now, after just a few minutes with a waitress in a small diner, everything he had ever known seemed hollow. He tried to shake it off, of course. The billionaire businessman inside him pushed to return to familiar ground. Focus, he told himself. You have a business to run. You can't afford distractions like this. But the unease, the uncertainty, only grew. That evening, as he walked into his penthouse suite, his fortress of solitude, Drake found it harder and harder to ignore the cracks forming in his carefully constructed life. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows stared back at him, a man who had it all but somehow felt like he was losing himself. The next morning, Drake arrived at work with a sense of unease gnawing at his gut. His assistant handed him the usual stack of reports, but today he barely glanced at them. The figures, the projections, the emails, it all felt trivial. He called a meeting with his executives, but it wasn't the same. His usually sharp questions, the cold, commanding tone that had always made people jump to attention, felt off. He found himself listening more than speaking, taking in what others had to say without rushing to shut them down or impose his will. His CFO, Matthew, noticed the shift and took the opportunity to make a suggestion. "We could explore some new investments in emerging markets, Drake. Perhaps some social impact projects," Matthew said, his voice cautious but hopeful. Normally, Drake would have dismissed such an idea out of hand. Social impact. That wasn't something that generated fast returns. But today, for some reason, he felt intrigued. "Tell me more," Drake said, surprising even himself. As Matthew began to outline the potential for investing in initiatives that could genuinely help communities while offering a financial return, Drake found himself drawn into the conversation. He wasn't thinking about the numbers. He wasn't thinking about profit margins. For the first time in years, he was thinking about the people who could benefit from these investments. Later that day, Drake found himself back at the diner. He hadn't planned it, but something about the place, something about Angela, kept pulling him back. He didn't want to go there to question her further, not at first. But as he stepped inside, the familiar warmth of the diner, the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling food, calmed him in a way nothing else had in days. Angela was there, of course. She noticed him almost immediately, but this time, instead of offering a smile or a quick greeting, she simply nodded, as if acknowledging the storm inside him. "What brings you back?" she asked, her tone warm but without the usual playfulness. Drake hesitated. He wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't used to being this vulnerable. But there was something in the way she had spoken to him the day before, something that made him want to be honest, something that made him want to admit that, for once, he didn't have all the answers. "I don't know," he said, his voice low. I think I'm starting to understand what you meant." Angela didn't speak at first. She just waited, watching him with those calm eyes that somehow made him feel seen in a way he wasn't accustomed to. "I've spent my whole life thinking money and power would fix everything," Drake continued, his voice tightening as he spoke. "But something doesn't feel right anymore. I've built an empire, but I'm starting to realize that maybe it's not everything I thought it was." Angela's gaze softened, and she set down the plate she'd been carrying. "It's never just about what you have," she said. "It's about what you do with it." Drake ran a hand through his hair. "I've spent so much time focusing on success, on being the best, that I forgot what it's like to live a life worth living, to be happy. Being happy isn't about what you own or how many people respect you," Angela replied. "It's about how you treat others, how you treat yourself." Drake nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling over him. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about business. It was about everything: his choices, his values, his way of living. That night Drake went home with a new resolve. He wasn't going to change everything overnight. He couldn't, but he knew he had to start somewhere. The next morning he called his team into a meeting. He didn't come in with his usual sharp, calculated approach. He came in, not as the billionaire, but as someone ready to listen. "I've been thinking a lot about our company's direction," he began, his tone uncharacteristically humble. "We've done well in the past, but it's time for us to shift. I want us to focus on projects that not only generate profit but that create value for people. Real value." His team was taken aback, but they listened. Drake had been a hard-nosed businessman for years, only caring about numbers. But now he was talking about something deeper. "I want us to invest in social impact projects," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "Projects that help communities, create jobs, and offer people a chance to improve their lives. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for us to be part of something that matters." Over the following weeks, Drake's transformation continued. The boardroom wasn't just filled with reports and projections anymore. It was filled with ideas for community building, for sustainable projects, and for investments that could change lives. The numbers still mattered, but now there was a deeper meaning behind them. Drake returned to the diner every so often, not for advice, but to reflect. Each visit, he felt a little more like himself, a little more like the person he was meant to be. One day, as he walked into the diner, Angela was there, of course. She greeted him with the same quiet smile, and for the first time, Drake felt completely at ease. "Things are different," he said, sitting down at the counter. "I've started making changes, small ones but real ones. I'm not chasing power anymore. I'm chasing something else." Angela nodded, not needing to ask what that something else was. She could see it in the way he carried himself now, the way he no longer rushed through life, always chasing the next deal. "You'll find it," she said, her voice as steady as ever. "But remember, the best things in life come when you stop chasing them so hard." Drake smiled, for the first time in a long while, feeling a sense of peace settle in his chest. He had started his journey toward a different kind of success, and though it wouldn't be easy, he knew he was finally on the right path. Drake felt like he was waking up from a long, deep slumber. Each day, the fog that had clouded his judgment seemed to lift just a little more. His meetings had changed. The constant drive for profit was still there, but now there was a sense of purpose behind it. He began focusing on projects that would have a lasting impact, on investments that would build communities, create jobs, and provide opportunities to people who had nothing. It was still early, but the shift was noticeable, even if subtle. He continued to meet with his executives, but now he encouraged ideas beyond the numbers. The team, initially shocked by the change in his approach, slowly began to adjust. They didn't expect it, but they respected it. Drake wasn't just a figurehead anymore. He was a leader who was finally showing them a different way of doing business. He'd often find himself sitting in his office late at night, staring out over the city, wondering what it all meant. The empire he had built, the wealth, the influence, it was all a means to an end. But now he wasn't sure what the end was anymore. The question of what truly matters had taken root in his mind, and there was no easy answer. On one of his evening drives, he found himself at the diner again. This time, he wasn't rushing through the door, eager to find answers or to challenge Angela. No, this time, he simply needed to be there, to feel the calmness of the place, to reflect on the progress he had made. He hadn't seen Angela in a while, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had shifted because of the conversation they'd had. When he stepped inside, the familiar scent of coffee filled his nose, and the warm hum of quiet conversation surrounded him. He could see Angela in the back, wiping down a counter. She didn't notice him at first, but when their eyes met, she gave him a nod of recognition, her gaze steady and unbothered. Drake walked up to the counter, sitting down as she finished cleaning. "I've been thinking about something you said," he began, his voice calm, not the usual commanding tone he was accustomed to using. Angela didn't look at him right away, but she didn't seem surprised. She simply leaned against the counter and gave him a soft smile. "Which part?" "The part about letting go of what I thought I needed," he replied. "It's been hard, but I think I'm starting to understand it. I've been so focused on building an empire that I forgot what really mattered. I was chasing after something that wasn't even real." She looked at him now, her eyes soft but knowing. "It's a hard realization, but it's a step in the right direction." Drake looked down at the countertop, his fingers tracing the worn surface. "I never thought I'd be here talking like this, but it feels right, you know. The business, the money, it doesn't feel as important as it used to. It's not about power, it's about purpose." Angela didn't say anything for a moment, letting him process his thoughts. She could see the change in him. It wasn't just the words, it was in his posture, his demeanor. He wasn't the man who had walked in months ago, demanding the world bend to his will. He was still driven, but now there was a humility to him, a willingness to learn and grow. "That's the start of something new," she finally said, her voice gentle but firm. "Don't let anyone or anything pull you away from it. The hardest part is trusting yourself, trusting that this is the right path, even when it feels uncertain." Drake smiled, a real smile this time, not the calculated grin he used to wear. "I'm learning to trust, slowly but surely." They both sat in silence for a while. There was no rush, no need to fill the air with words. It was the kind of silence that made Drake feel more at peace than he had in years. He wasn't looking for validation anymore. He was simply trying to live in a way that felt true. The days that followed were filled with small moments of change. Drake continued his efforts to shift the direction of his company, pouring more resources into projects that would impact real people's lives. He even started working more closely with his employees, finding ways to include them in decision-making and listening to their ideas. The power dynamics that once defined his leadership began to dissolve, replaced by something more collaborative and genuine. But despite the progress he was making, there were still moments of doubt. There were days when the old, familiar feeling of insecurity crept back into his mind. Was this enough? Was he doing the right thing? The question lingered, but instead of pushing it away, Drake sat with it. He allowed himself the space to feel unsure. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of uncertainty. It was part of the journey. One late afternoon, as he was leaving the office, Drake felt an overwhelming need to go back to the diner. It had become a kind of sanctuary for him, a place where he could sit with his thoughts and feel like he wasn't chasing something he could never catch. When he arrived, the evening rush had begun, and the din of chatter filled the air. Angela was behind the counter, but this time she didn't notice him right away. He took a seat in his usual spot and waited. When she finally saw him, she gave him a small wave. "Back again?" she asked, walking over to him with a cup of coffee in hand. "Yeah," Drake said with a smile. "I think I'm starting to make this a habit." She set the cup down in front of him, her eyes meeting his. "I think it's a good habit," she said, and for a moment it felt like she wasn't just talking about the coffee. Drake took a sip, savoring the warmth. "I've been thinking about how far I've come since we first met, and I realized something. I don't need to have it all figured out right now. I don't need to control everything. I just need to keep moving forward." Angela nodded, as if she had expected this answer all along. "That's the key, Drake. It's about the journey, not the destination." Drake had learned to embrace the uncertainty that had once terrified him. As his days filled with small but impactful changes, he started to notice a shift in his relationships with others. His executives, his employees, and even his family began to respond to him differently. There was a sense of openness in his interactions, a willingness to listen that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just about making deals anymore. It was about connecting, about understanding the needs of those around him. At the same time, his efforts to transform the company were beginning to bear fruit. The projects aimed at social impact were slowly gaining momentum, and while they didn't generate the same immediate returns as his past ventures, there was something gratifying about knowing that they were making a difference. Drake found himself spending more time in the field, meeting the people his investments were affecting. Each conversation, each story he heard, reinforced the idea that he was on the right path. But even with all the progress he had made, there were moments of doubt. He wasn't immune to the pressures of the world he had once dominated. His old habits occasionally resurfaced, like an itch he couldn't quite scratch. The drive for success, for recognition, still lingered beneath the surface, threatening to pull him back into the same patterns he was working so hard to break. There were days when the pressure to be the best, to reclaim the top spot, felt overwhelming. One evening, after a particularly draining meeting with his board of directors, Drake found himself standing at the edge of his penthouse balcony, staring out at the city lights. The hum of the city below seemed distant, like a world he no longer fully belonged to. He had everything a man could want, yet there was still a hollowness inside him, a sense that he was missing something crucial. He thought about Angela, about their conversations. She had been the catalyst for his change, but now he felt like he was at a crossroads. What had seemed so clear in the beginning, the desire to find a different path, now seemed more complicated. Could he really change? Could he hold on to this new version of himself in the face of everything he had built? The doubt gnawed at him, and for the first time in a long while he felt completely lost. He needed answers, but he wasn't sure where to find them. The next day he returned to the diner. The place felt different somehow, quieter, as though it was waiting for him. Angela was there, of course, behind the counter, her usual calm demeanor in place. When their eyes met, she gave him a small nod, as if acknowledging the weight he carried with him today. Drake walked over to the counter, taking his usual seat. Angela didn't say anything at first, but she placed a cup of coffee in front of him with a knowing look. She had seen the change in him, but she also understood the internal struggle that still lingered. "I'm struggling," Drake admitted, his voice low. "I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I was on the right path, but I'm not sure anymore. Everything I've worked for, everything I've built, it feels empty." Angela sat down across from him, her eyes soft but direct. "It's not uncommon to feel that way," she said gently. "The things you've worked for, the things you've built, they're important, but they're not everything. It's easy to get caught up in the idea of success, to think that what you have defines who you are. But that's not true." Drake ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "But how do I change that? How do I keep going down this path when it feels like the world is pulling me in a different direction? I've spent so many years building this empire. It's all I know." "You're not the empire you've built," Angela said, her voice steady. "You're not your success, your wealth, or the power you have. You're more than that. The path you're on now, this new journey you're starting, it's about learning who you really are beyond all of that." Drake's eyes met hers, and for the first time he felt the weight of her words settle deeply within him. She was right. He wasn't his empire. He wasn't the sum of his wealth or his accomplishments. He was something more. But what? He had no answer. Not yet. But he was starting to realize that maybe the journey wasn't about finding all the answers immediately. Maybe it was about asking the right questions, about continuing to grow, to change, and to be open to the possibility of something greater. The weeks that followed were filled with incremental changes. Drake continued to focus on the social impact projects that had been the heart of his transformation. He spent time volunteering at shelters, meeting with local leaders, and getting involved in causes that resonated with him on a deeper level. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't the kind of work that would land him on the front page of business magazines, but it felt real. At the same time, his relationships with those around him grew more meaningful. He began to reconnect with old friends and family members he had neglected over the years. He listened more, understood more, and found a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. But the change was not without challenges. There were moments when the old Drake, the ruthless businessman, the man obsessed with success, reared his head. He found himself torn between the life he was now building and the one he had left behind. The pull of his old habits of the world he had created was still strong. One evening, after a long day of meetings and community outreach, Drake sat alone in his office, staring at the city below. His mind was tired, but his thoughts were restless. The internal conflict was still there, simmering beneath the surface. He had changed, yes, but how far had he really come? The struggle was real, and it was becoming harder for Drake to ignore. He'd spent his whole life building an empire on ambition, power, and control. Every deal he made, every risk he took, was about one thing: winning. But now, with everything starting to shift, the same empire that once fueled his pride felt like a cage. He'd gone from being a leader who controlled every aspect of his business to a man who didn't feel quite in control of his own life anymore. The old Drake, the one who had no qualms about stepping on others to get ahead, the one who saw life as a game of winners and losers, was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. And every day, he felt the tug to return to that version of himself. But the new Drake, the one who wanted to make a difference, who saw value in people beyond their ability to generate profit, he was beginning to feel more real. The challenge was maintaining that part of himself in a world that expected success to be measured by wealth and power. That afternoon, Drake sat in his office, trying to focus on the reports in front of him, but his mind kept drifting. The company's quarterly earnings were solid as usual, but the satisfaction he used to feel when seeing those numbers was gone. He no longer felt the rush of victory. Instead, there was a hollow emptiness that settled in his chest whenever he glanced at the figures. It was a familiar feeling, one he had ignored for so long, but now it seemed impossible to escape. Drake had scheduled a meeting with his top executives, a quarterly update where they would review the company's progress. But as he sat at the head of the table, he felt out of place. His team had gathered around him, prepared for the usual high-energy, high-stakes conversation that came with these meetings, but Drake wasn't in the mood for it. The energy in the room was different today, and not just because of him. There was a growing awareness that things were shifting within the company, and it wasn't just the numbers. People could sense it. His employees, his partners, his friends, they could all feel that something had changed in him. And though they respected him for it, they didn't quite know what to make of it. "I've been looking over the reports," Drake began, his voice measured but not commanding, "and I'm pleased with the numbers. But I've also been thinking a lot about the bigger picture." There was a slight pause as his team exchanged uncertain glances. They had grown used to Drake's confident, sometimes domineering approach to leadership. But now, there was an unfamiliar softness to his words. "What do you mean, sir?" Matthew, his CFO, asked, eyebrow raised. Drake took a deep breath, then leaned back in his chair. "I've been thinking about the direction of this company. The numbers are great, but we need more than that. We need to be doing something that matters. We need to think about how we're impacting the world, not just how much money we're making." The silence in the room was thick. Drake had always been the one who focused on growth at any cost, on scaling the business and building an empire. But now, he was talking about something deeper. "You mean social responsibility?" Jessica, the head of marketing, asked, cautiously testing the waters. Drake nodded. "Exactly. I want us to invest in things that will actually make a difference. Community projects, sustainability efforts, things that create real value for people, not just for our bottom line." There was a visible shift in the room. His executives weren't sure how to respond. They had all grown accustomed to the hard-edged version of Drake, the one who pushed them to excel at any cost. Now, here he was, talking about human connection, about creating lasting value. "Are we going to pull back on our growth projections?" Matthew asked, his voice tinged with concern. "We're on track to reach a significant profit margin this year and—" "No," Drake interrupted, his tone firm but calm. "We won't pull back. We'll still push for growth, but it will be growth that benefits others. It won't just be about profits anymore. It'll be about purpose." There was a long pause as his team took in the shift in his approach. No one had expected this. But at the same time, they saw it. This was the Drake they had been waiting for. The one who could lead with integrity, with purpose, and still get results. But they were unsure of how it would work in practice. Would he really be able to walk the line between profitability and social responsibility? "I know this is a big shift," Drake continued, standing up and walking to the window, his back to the room. "But I can't keep living like I was. I've been chasing the wrong things. And it's time we did things differently. It's time for this company to stand for something more than just making money." That evening, as Drake walked through his penthouse, the weight of the day settled heavily on him. He knew he was doing the right thing, but there was a part of him that still craved the old life. The rush of a new deal, the thrill of outmaneuvering competitors, the feeling of power that came with being at the top. The old Drake, the one who was relentless in his pursuit of success, was still there, lurking in the back of his mind. There were days when he longed for the simplicity of it all, the certainty, the control. But he knew that was a life that had left him empty. As he stood by the window, staring out over the city, he thought about Angella. She had been the catalyst for this change, the one who had made him question everything. He remembered their conversations, how simple they had been, how unassuming she was, yet how profound her words had been. "You think your wealth gives you power, but the true key to success is understanding that money doesn't make you rich, your mindset does." Those words echoed in his mind every day, and he knew they were true. But it was still hard. It was hard to let go of the person he had been, of the life he had built. As Drake's transformation continued, the road ahead was uncertain. But with each passing day, he took steps toward something better, toward a version of himself that was more authentic, more connected to what really mattered. He wasn't there yet, far from it, but for the first time he felt like he was on the right path. And as he returned to the diner one more time, seeking the peace he had come to rely on, he found that his journey wasn't just about success. It was about something deeper, about learning to live a life that mattered, a life that would leave a legacy not just of wealth, but of genuine impact. Drake had come to accept that change wasn't going to happen overnight. It wasn't like flipping a switch. Some days he felt the weight of his old self pushing against the new habits he was trying to form, like an invisible force trying to drag him back to the familiar. But every time he found himself in the grip of his past, there was something, some small shift inside him, that stopped him from falling back into his old ways. That day he found himself back at his desk, poring over a new set of reports. His hand hovered over the numbers, but his mind was elsewhere. The pressure of the corporate world was still there, but it wasn't as suffocating as it used to be. He had started to understand that he didn't need to dominate everything. The world didn't have to be a battlefield. The business could still grow, still thrive, without him needing to crush anyone in his path. "Drake, can I speak with you for a moment?" Matthew's voice pulled him back to the present. Drake turned to see his CFO standing in the doorway, looking more hesitant than usual. The shift in Drake's approach hadn't gone unnoticed, and Matthew had been one of the first to question whether it was a temporary phase or something more lasting. "Sure, come in," Drake said, trying to sound casual, though he knew what the conversation was going to be about. Matthew stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Look, I've been reviewing the new initiatives you've been pushing. The social impact projects, the investments in sustainability, the community-focused stuff. It's good, Drake, but I have to be honest. Some of our biggest investors are starting to ask questions." Drake's chest tightened. "What kind of questions?" "They're concerned that we're losing focus on the bottom line. They want results. They want to see numbers, profit margins, return on investments. And frankly, the projects you're pursuing right now don't seem to offer the kind of quick return they're used to." Drake leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the edge of his desk. "I know, but I'm not interested in short-term gains anymore, Matthew. I'm more concerned with leaving something behind that matters. It's not just about the numbers anymore. It's about the people." Matthew's eyes narrowed. "You've always said that, but now it feels like you're trying to change everything all at once. We can't forget that we're still a business, and businesses need to make money. If we start straying too far from that, we could lose everything." Drake let out a sigh, his gaze fixed on the window. The city below seemed to be thriving, but from where he sat, everything felt fragile. He wasn't sure how to balance the two worlds, the world of profits and power that he knew so well, and the new world he was trying to build, one focused on creating real change. "I understand the risks, Matthew, but if we keep chasing after the same thing just for the sake of profit, what are we really building? If all we care about is money, then what's the point?" There was a silence between them, thick with tension. Matthew seemed to weigh Drake's words carefully. Finally, he spoke. "I get what you're saying, Drake. I do. But don't forget, this company was built on the back of those profits you're questioning now. We need to figure out how to merge the two, how to make money and make a difference. And we need to do it carefully." Drake nodded, his mind spinning. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, but he had come this far, and he wasn't about to let fear or old habits push him back into a life he no longer wanted. The following weeks were filled with difficult decisions. Drake worked tirelessly with his team, trying to find a way to balance the demands of his investors with the new direction he was pursuing. There were moments when he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, when the old Drake, focused solely on power and control, tried to resurface. But every time he fought back. He had come too far to give in. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Drake found himself walking back to the diner once again. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the need for peace, or maybe it was because Angella's words still lingered in his mind. The last time he had been there, she had given him the space to figure things out, and perhaps it was time to revisit the place that had sparked it all. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The familiar warmth of the diner embraced him, and the hum of quiet conversations filled the air. There was something comforting about it, something real, like stepping out of the chaos and into something simpler. Angella was behind the counter, but she didn't look up when he entered. She was used to seeing him by now. He found his usual seat at the counter, and a moment later, she came over with a cup of coffee, placing it in front of him without saying a word. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. She nodded but didn't speak right away. Instead, she stood there for a moment, as if waiting for him to say something more. "I don't know how to do this," Drake admitted, his hands wrapped around the cup. "I don't know how to merge what I've built with the kind of life I want to lead now." Angella leaned against the counter, her gaze steady but kind. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now," she said softly. "The journey is the point. You're on the right path, Drake. The rest will follow." He shook his head. "It's not that simple. The people I've worked with, the investors, they want results, and I'm afraid I'll lose everything if I go too far down this road." Angela's expression didn't change, but there was a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. You're scared of losing what you've built, but what if you're already losing something more important? The real question is, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? Drake's heart tightened. The question felt too big to answer, but as he sat there in the quiet diner with Angela's words swirling in his mind, he realized something. He wasn't alone in this. The path he was on might be difficult, but he didn't have to figure it all out by himself. He had people who believed in him, his team, his family, and even himself. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to get him through. Drake sat in his office the following morning, reviewing the latest round of proposals for his company's social impact initiatives. His fingers hovered over the papers, but his mind was elsewhere. The company was moving forward, yes. The numbers were solid and the projects were making headway, but something was still nagging at him. The tension between his old life and the new one he was trying to build hadn't disappeared. It was just hidden beneath the surface. Despite his best efforts, the voices of doubt returned. His investors were starting to ask more pointed questions about the financial returns on the new initiatives. The reality of balancing profit and purpose was becoming clearer. It wasn't going to be as simple as he had hoped. And while he tried to stay true to his convictions, the pressure of the business world was relentless. He rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the decision ahead. His team had made great strides in implementing the social impact projects, but the numbers didn't add up in the way they used to. The financial pressure was mounting. He knew he had to make a choice, either double down on the old business model and secure his place at the top, or take a risk and push forward with the new direction, hoping it would all eventually come together. Drake spent the rest of the day drafting a message to his top executives, asking them to meet him that evening. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he knew he had to make it clear that the company's direction was no longer just about profits. It was about leaving a legacy, about building something that lasted, something that could positively impact people's lives beyond the bottom line. When the meeting began, there was an underlying tension in the room. His executives, used to the old Drake, forceful, determined, and focused on financial gain, were unsure of what to expect. The atmosphere had changed, and they were still processing his shift in priorities. The question in the air was whether this new direction could really work. "I know many of you are concerned about the direction I've proposed," Drake started, his voice steady. "The truth is, I'm worried too. We've been making significant investments into social impact projects, but the returns aren't what we're used to. I'm not going to pretend that this is easy, and I'm not going to pretend that I have all the answers, but I believe that what we're doing is important." There was a long pause before Matthew, the CFO, spoke. "I understand the desire to make a difference, Drake, but this company was built on numbers, on profit. We can't abandon that. If we continue down this path without ensuring solid returns, we risk losing everything we've worked for." Drake's gaze remained focused on Matthew, but there was a sense of resolve in his expression. "I don't want to lose the business, Matthew. I don't want to lose what we've built, but I also don't want to spend my life chasing something that doesn't bring real value. We've spent so long focused on financial success, but we've ignored the people who make that success possible." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes scanning the room. "I'm asking you to take a chance on this. Yes, the numbers might not be as impressive right now, but we have the chance to create something lasting, something that really helps people. If we can't do that, then what's the point of everything we've built?" The room was silent. For the first time in a long while, his executives seemed unsure of how to respond. They were used to Drake being the one who had all the answers, the one who dictated the path forward. But now, he was asking them to follow him into uncharted territory. Finally, Jessica, the head of marketing, spoke. "You've always pushed us to be better, to think bigger. If this is the direction you want to take, we'll support you. It's going to be hard, but if we're truly going to leave a legacy, we need to make these changes." The others nodded slowly, some more reluctantly than others, but the sense of unity was undeniable. They were willing to follow Drake, even if they didn't fully understand where this new path would lead. Drake nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time he felt like he was doing the right thing. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was the only one he could walk now, and he wasn't walking it alone. As weeks passed, Drake continued to pour his energy into the company's new initiatives. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks, clients who questioned the new direction, investors who pulled their support, and even members of his team who doubted whether this was the right move. But through it all, Drake felt a sense of peace that he hadn't experienced in years. He was no longer chasing an illusion. He was finally living for something real. But the true test came one night when an unexpected crisis hit. A major client, one of the company's largest and most lucrative, threatened to pull their business unless Drake could deliver the kind of results they were used to: fast, high-margin returns. The client's demands were clear. If the company didn't revert to its old model, they would walk. Drake sat in his office staring at the email. The decision was simple. He could give in, fall back into his old ways, and keep the client. The company's finances would be secure and the investors would be happy. Or he could stand firm, hold his ground, and risk losing the client and perhaps the financial security that came with it. For the first time in months, Drake's hands were shaking as he stared at the screen. His old instincts screamed at him to take the easy route, to preserve the company's financial stability. But his heart told him to stay true to the new direction. He couldn't keep running from the life he wanted. He couldn't betray the values he was trying to build. With a deep breath, he typed a response. "We're committed to the new direction, and we believe it will create long-term value for both parties. If that's not something you're willing to invest in, we understand. But we're not turning back." He hit send. It was done. The next day the call came. The client was pulling out. But instead of feeling defeated, Drake felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't the end of his business. It was the beginning of something new. As the days passed, Drake's confidence grew. The company had lost a client, yes, but it had gained something far more valuable: clarity. He wasn't in it for the quick wins anymore. He was in it for the long haul. And slowly, other clients who believed in the new direction began to take notice. The company's reputation grew, not just as a financial powerhouse, but as a force for good in the world. The days following the loss of the major client were filled with a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. Drake spent hours in his office, reflecting on the decision he had made. He knew it had been the right choice, but there was always a lingering doubt in the back of his mind. Would the company survive? Would his vision truly work? But as time passed, something incredible began to happen. Slowly, clients who aligned with his new approach started to come forward. They weren't just looking for the quickest return on investment. They were looking for something deeper, something with purpose. These clients saw the value in social impact and sustainability. They believed in Drake's vision of creating a legacy, not just a profit. The financial strain that Drake had feared never came. The new partnerships grew, and soon his company began to thrive again, not just in revenue but in reputation. Word spread about the company's commitment to making a difference, and it wasn't long before other businesses in the industry began following suit. Drake had done it. He had not only saved his business, but he had made it stronger by staying true to his values. The turning point came when Drake was invited to speak at a global conference on business sustainability. It was a high-profile event, attended by some of the world's most influential business leaders. Drake had been asked to share his journey, how he had managed to merge profitability with social responsibility in an industry where such ideas were often dismissed. As he stood on the stage, looking out at the sea of executives, he realized how far he had come. The Drake who had once been driven solely by the need for power and wealth was gone. In his place stood a man who understood the true value of leadership, one who had learned that success was about more than just numbers. It was about impact, integrity, and human connection. He took a deep breath before he began to speak. When I started this journey, I was chasing the wrong things. I thought money and power were the answers to everything. But the truth is, the real measure of success is how much we're able to give back, how much we're able to create change that lasts. The words felt genuine, a reflection of everything he had learned over the past year. And as he spoke, he could feel a weight lifting off his shoulders, a burden he had carried for so long finally being released. "I'm proud to say that my company is thriving," he continued, "not just financially, but in the ways that truly matter. And while the road to get here wasn't easy, it was the only road worth taking." The room was silent for a moment, and then, slowly, the applause began. It wasn't just for his business acumen, it was for his transformation, for the courage to embrace change, to admit that success wasn't about being at the top, but about making a difference along the way. As Drake left the stage, he felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for most of his life. He had reached a new level of success, one that wasn't defined by the size of his bank account or the number of deals he had closed, but by the positive impact he had made on the world around him. Later that evening, as he walked back to his hotel, he stopped by a small cafe, a quiet place he had discovered on his travels. It was a stark contrast to the glitz and glamour of the corporate events he had been attending. The cafe was modest, with soft lighting and an atmosphere of quiet warmth. And there, sitting by the window, was Angela. He smiled as he approached her. She looked up, surprised but pleased to see him. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, standing to greet him. "I didn't expect to be here either," Drake replied, his voice light. "But I think I've finally figured things out." Angela's eyes searched his face as if looking for something. When she spoke, her tone was soft but knowing. "You're not the same man who walked in that diner all those months ago." Drake chuckled, taking a seat across from her. "No, I'm not. I'm still figuring it out, but I know one thing for sure. I'm doing the right thing now." Angela smiled, her gaze gentle. "I'm glad to hear that." The conversation flowed easily between them, but this time there was no tension, no uncertainty in Drake's words. He spoke about the future, about his company, his new projects, and the changes he was committed to making in the world. Angela listened, offering quiet encouragement as he spoke, as she always had. For the first time in a long while, Drake wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He wasn't chasing success or power. He was simply living in the moment, embracing the changes he had worked so hard to achieve. As the evening came to a close, Drake stood to leave. He turned to Angela, his heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Angela nodded, her smile warm. "You did it, Drake. You found your way." He paused for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. He had found his way, but more importantly, he had found himself. And that was worth more than any amount of wealth or success he had ever chased. As he walked out of the cafe, the city lights reflecting in his eyes, he knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges, doubts, and obstacles along the way. But for the first time, he felt ready for them. He wasn't just a billionaire anymore. He was a man who had learned to lead with purpose, a man who understood that success was not just about what you could achieve, but what you could give. And with that, Drake Harrison walked forward into the future, not as the man he had been, but as the man he had always wanted to be.